So when they broke through the front page, they saw a welcome colleagues from Dr. Helic Branimore, who is an esteemed xenobiologist, and he was talking to a bunch of scientists that were just arriving. And little by little, you would piece together the names of these things. And so when people found that, they started finding our Twitter accounts and started digging back and saying like, whoa, they've been tweeting for like a week before this, and they start putting the story together, start putting these pieces together. And it was interesting watching the follows on these Twitter accounts go from 10, 15 to 100, 300, 900, 1,000 followers very, very quickly as people got excited about this. And so all of a sudden we've got an audience. And all of a sudden we've got people that are realizing, whoa, and they were talking about dissecting these zerglings. And that same Thursday, there's that short story that's about zerglings. And then next week it's about hydralisks, which is another cool alien creature from the game. And the scientist inside the short story was actually referred to in this thing. And all of a sudden, this universe that I think for a lot of people was feeling very focused on just a few little characters was spread across the vast array of stars. And that's really what we wanted to give, is this sense of, I call it the Kessel Run effect. You know in Star Wars where Luke goes to Han and asks him about the Millennium Falcon, and he says, yeah, it's the one that does the Kessel Run and blah, blah, blah. And there's no explanation about what the Kessel Run is or what that means or and I love that George Lucas trusted us as audience members to say, this is a big universe. People know there are these things you can just throw out colloquially, and there will be some sense of deeper, richer universe behind that. And we wanted to give that sense. We didn't want to have a single mention of Jim Raynor or Sarah Kerrigan or any of the main characters who have been kind of at the backbone of the StarCraft story for so long. We wanted to show there's a lot of really cool shit simmering in the background here. So little by little, we jumped into that full production, and we were putting out elements of blog, elements of art, elements of Twitter, and these short stories as they went along. The coolest part was that we were at the same time tracking the unique lore visits, and it was something that our StarCraft site had been kind of dipping down in, because we realized as people were getting more and more into the esports side of the game, for some reason they were not as connected to the lore side of the game, and we wanted to bridge that gap. And so there's kind of a cool story about how we finally bridged that as well. I don't know if any of you guys want to, Robert, do you want to tell that story about the Widow Mine? Because you were very close involved in that.
Well, one of the things about these, one of the ways we knew we could use this Twitter campaign is because the beta, the Heart of the Swarm multiplayer beta had been in effect for several months and was winding down. So we thought it would be interesting to start rooting these last few changes that the multiplayer designs were going to make about how their weapons are developing, how the units are behaving, root it in lore, like give a story behind it. So we hear from the team that today we're going to boost the Widow Mine, which is one of the human units, against Protoss. It's going to be a little bit stronger.
Let's make a bigger boom.
Yep. So before I think it was just before they actually announced that on the forums, on their blog, all that stuff, we started having these two characters talk together. These two engineers. They're talking about we should make the Widow Mine a little bit stronger.
Like, actually a mixed character and your character.
Yeah. The two engineers started saying, we could really do a little bit more bang for a buck in each of those Widow Mines. And people started immediately cursing at us.
Not at you. At your character. That was the beautiful part. Yeah.
People started immediately cursing at our characters' Twitter accounts, saying no, they're already effing imba. Like don't boost them. And then suddenly, the patch notes get released, and the Widow Mines are actually buffed a little bit. So, and that got a little bit of attention too, because it's not just story. We're actually trying to tie it into what's happening in the beta and stuff like that. So,
well, I think that's where we saw the next big surge in followers for the Twitter, and our analytics were showing a surge in people interested in these pages when they finally made that connection of this story stuff. If I'm reading the story and following what's happening in the narrative, I'm actually clued into what's going to be happening in the game in a very deliberate and very gameplay based sort of thing. And it was so cool watching those little light bulbs turn on in their heads, and like, okay. And all of a sudden, the next week, we're seeing the forums just alive with, okay, what are they discussing next? What's the next thing that's going to go? And for us, the little lights flicking on saying like, wow, our storytelling is being devoured because we can be responding to what we're doing. And that feels, I think it felt to all of us, much more like the kind of storytelling that should exist in gameplay. The kind of storytelling that should exist in a transmedia universe is stuff that, you know, plays the drum roll before the curtain goes up. That's sort of exciting.
Something else worth mentioning too is, you know, you could say, oh well, you could just go on your website and you could put up, you know, blurbs talking about, you know, what Robert was just mentioning, widow mines, and do it from a story perspective. But there's localization to take into account with that kind of stuff. So for Twitter, you know, when they're tweeting, it just went out immediately. We didn't have to worry about localization and going through the entire process that we would normally have to go through just to put up, you know, a one-page write-up.
Yeah, and that's one of Blizzard's, you know, main mission statements is think globally. And so anytime a book, even a short story goes out, it's got to come out in all the languages across the board. And so we made our concessions to that by saying, oh, you know what, after every single month we'll take all of our tweets and we will have them translated and put up on our international sites. And in saying and making that concession, it gave us that ability to be much more agile with the storytelling as well. So one of the coolest things, though, in the end, and I'm talking about the analytics we're getting back from web, is the first time we saw the numbers of web hits. And they had been fairly, I think I'm being complimentary if I say modest, for a lot of the StarCraft lore sites. And once Project Blackstone was going full stream, the numbers went up significantly. They didn't just double, they didn't just triple. They were up 13,000%.
Oh my God.
13,000%. If you have any question about the effectiveness of targeted storytelling and responsive storytelling, that number right there should let you know. There is a hunger, I believe, for any type of gamer out there. There's a hunger for storytelling. You know, I know a lot of times we'll say, yeah, these guys are min-maxers. These guys they just want tactics. These guys don't care about story at all. I think we all care about story. I think as human beings, it is part of our DNA. It's just how is that story delivered, and what flavor is that given? So that's roughly what I wanted to talk about as far as the history and the creation. But I had some questions for our crew here as well, and then I'm going to open this up for discussion as well if you guys have anything you wanted to say. First of all, I wanted we'll just kind of go down the line. Robert created a character named Red Quinton, and in this high-tech, futuristic world of xenobiologists and fancy $12 words, he created a redneck, and it went over incredibly well. So I was wondering if you wanted to talk a little bit about that creation of the character and the responses we got to that character.
Well, this was pretty soon after I got hired at Blizzard.
Yeah.
You know, you're asking like, there's a character you want to do? You gave me a little bit of overview about what Blackstone's looking like, the characters we already had. I think there's only like 6 or 7 at the time, grew to 12 or so. But and you know, there's all these scientists. There's all these these very educated, these people who are at the top of their respective fields. And I was thinking, that's cool. What could cause them problems? And what I thought was, well, in StarCraft, if you've ever played the Terran faction, 50 Terran characters, you click on your SCV and you get this sarcastic redneck, you know, saying, "What do you want?" You know, if you tell him to go attack, he goes, "What? You run out of Marines?" Which is usually true, actually. If you're using your SCVs to attack, that's exactly what happens. You're about to die. And it's like that sort of sarcasm that comes across, and that's just that's part of the milieu of StarCraft, like in
Blizzard in general.
Yeah, like you just click on, you get this little soundbite, and it sort of characterizes it for him. I thought it'd be really interesting to take that sort of character and blow him up into someone as effective as all these scientists. So he became this sort of savant, engineer, redneck. He has no formal
That is
education.
the last time you'll ever hear those words put together. So I appreciate that.
He has no. He very much. I want him to feel like a good old boy, but he has no formal education, but he makes things work, and that's why. And the entire human Caprulu sector story within StarCraft is they've been at war basically forever. That's just how it is. Like even before the Zerg showed up, like you start the first mission, there's already people starting like they're wanting to shoot each other. Humans are wanting to shoot each other. So his entire life, he's basically been on the battlefield, and he's sort of been the guy who can fix things in the middle of combat. He's the guy who can sort of figure things out. He's even been sort of at least partially responsible for like these battlefield innovations that sometimes happen for these different factions. So, and I thought, you know, you have all these nice people, educated, and they're going to be talking to each other all the time, and this is a guy who's going to talk exactly not like them. That doesn't mean he's going to be causing problems for them or causing conflict, but there is going to be a difference in how they approach things, and in that difference where they have to close their gap, you can talk about things to the audience, like so the audience can see them. So like, the super smart biology guy is talking about theories, and he just wants to know whether or not this infested Terran he has on his table is going to blow up if he removes his head. Like that's Red's primary concern. Am I going to die if I stick a saw into this thing and dissect it? And just closing that gap, he has to, the biology guy has to explain why it's not going to explode now.
It's kind of provided a nice straight man sometimes. Well, I wouldn't say he was a straight man, but it made a nice sort of, you get all these highfalutin words, and then he'd summarize it. Oh, so what you're saying is it'll blow up if I stick a pin in it. Yeah.
Stuff like that. Yeah.
But he was really handy. It became one of our most, I think, beloved characters. I won't give any spoilers for what's going to happen to Dear Sweet Red, but then in the end, our final short story is an SCD short story that actually has one of his comrades in it. So we kind of tied that up. So Micky was incredibly busy while we were doing this project, and I was hesitant to ask him to take a part because he's managing all our novels and short stories and stuff. But I couldn't resist because so much of the flavor of what we do at Blizzard is through Mick's unique and slightly psychotic perspective. So I asked him what kind of character would he like to do, and he says, I want to write a black woman.
Nice.
And so I would love to explore, because I don't even know exactly why you said that. I would love to explore that in this very comfortable forum of public people you've never met before.
Yeah. So I'm not a black female, and on top of that, she's a chemical engineer, and I'm an artist. Like, I started off at Blizzard as an artist, so completely opposite side of the brain. I don't even know what a chemical engineer does. I just, we were talking about like, okay, well, all these scientists and everything else, they've got to have a chemical engineer. I said, okay, sure, I'll try it. And so I went on to Wikipedia and looked up chemical engineering. And I just kind of borrowed a bunch of big words from that and said, okay, I can string these together in a sentence. And then I had to try and figure out, is this what a black female chemical engineer would say? So if you ever want to stretch yourself as a writer, do something like that. Definitely go as far away from yourself as possible, and try it out and see what happens. And I had a lot of fun with it, and my character interacted with Red a lot.
Yeah, if you want to do something uncomfortable as an employee, my character Red was Pamela Foster's boss within this fiction, and Red Quinton is also an unapologetic flirter, womanizer.
And a redneck.
And a redneck and a womanizer. And so
you're already seeing where this is going,
yeah.
right?
So if you want to be really uncomfortable as a somewhat new employee at your company, you send your boss these horrible, horrible lines and say, so what would you say to that, Micky?
And it's all in character and everything else, and we worked our way through it.
Yeah.
Well, and the other thing we found out was, none of us really were scientists. I had a botched attempt at being a pre-med student way back in college days, just enough to know where you can completely ruin talking about science. But what we found out, and that was the wonderful thing about Twitter, Twitter forces you cannot get windy on things. You have to break it down. And chemical engineers and xenobiologists, when they're tweeting to each other, they're going to use shorthand anyway. And they're not going to be tweeting about the strands of deoxyribonucleic acid they're pulling apart. They're going to be talking about what they had for lunch. And then we talk about it's enchilada Thursday again. Sweet, let's go hit the cafeteria. And so we were able to really do a lot of characterization that I think felt right. So we've been talking about these two characters that were completely just burst from the muse here. Matt, however, had a different challenge. He had to take Jake Ramsey, who is the star of Christy Golden's amazing series of StarCraft books. I recommend you pick them up. He's already got a very kind of storied past, and we thought it would be really cool to, again, in the spirit of transmedia, bring in somebody from the novel universe and a character that everybody was worried about and curious about what had happened to him. And so Matt, I was wondering if you wouldn't mind talking a little bit about what that was like.
Yeah. Well, so really early on, in
after Cameron had thought all this up, and we kind of sat down at the whiteboard and we were writing down like which characters are going to be a part of this Project Blackstone. I think he was one of the first ones that came to mind, just because he was already in the lore, he was already a big character in the lore, and he was a character that was just really interesting. Like, just very briefly, he has some experience with the alien race, the Protoss in StarCraft, so he's learned basically some of their history through sharing memories with one of the Protoss. So for Blackstone in particular, he was a great person to have there because he could have great insight into the Protoss whenever a subject about them came up. And also, like, all the scientists on Project Blackstone were generally okay with being there. Like, they were kind of on board to some extent with the Dominion. But Jake was one of the only guys who was taken there by force against his will. So he also was kind of a character we could explore some of that conflict with. You know, like, he didn't want to be there. They were forcing him to do things, so it was just a fun character to play with in that respect as well.
Yeah, I think one of the great things too is, I mean, he has literally held the entire Protoss mental web in his brain at one point.
Yeah.
And so we could play with that fun line of, is he going crazy or is he having flashbacks? He's got sympathy for the Protoss that are being experimented on in this facility, and
nobody else does.
And nobody else does, and so nobody knows whether to believe him or not. Nobody really understands why is this I don't know if you folks have much experience with the kind of people that often exist in academic circles, but often if you don't have a PhD behind your name, you're not worth talking to. And so kind of dealt with a little bit of that back and forth, and then how painful it was for them to realize his insights were spot on about these beings they were trying so hard to understand.